Hi, this is your host Swapnil Bhartiya, and today we have with us once again Hilary Carter, SVP of Research at the Linux Foundation. Hilary, it's great to have you back on the show.
It is great to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. And you folks, of course, work on a lot of reports. But today we are going to talk about two reports. One is open source software developer report, and second is around generative AI. So let's start. Which I will let you to pick which one you start with, and we'll go from there. So let's just start with the intro, the idea behind these reports.
Well, I would say that the Open Source Software Developer Report was an initiative that came to us from one of our members, from Intel. And they said to us, look, we've got a hypothesis that we want to test. And that hypothesis was around the idea that open source software developers need different things from product developers. That open source software developer journeys are unique, and that it's incumbent upon organizations to nurture their open source software teams with the right resources and to demonstrate that those needs are different across departments, that open source software as a community, as a department, or as an organizational strategy is just simply strategically, operationally, and in terms of resourcing, different from other departments. And so we set about to understand what was it that was most important to open source software teams. And I'll take a step back to say that, as you know, Swap, the tech industry has been under a lot of constraint. We have experienced shocks post-COVID, as there was this acceleration to digital transformation and online learning and online everything during COVID lockdowns. Post-COVID, there was a realignment of team size and budgets. Folks were going back into the office again, and there was a readjustment time. And that was a particularly painful period. We saw a lot of layoffs in the tech industry. And everything came under scrutiny again as organizations were kind of adjusting to a post-COVID world. And there was data to suggest that software developers do not prioritize things like in-person events. And that was very troubling. That was a very troubling statistics. It ranked somewhere like 17th on the list of priorities for what software developers need. They don't need to go to events. They've got everything they need right in-house. And so companies were cutting their travel budgets outright, saying, well, we have data to suggest that software developers don't need to come to events, so we're not coming. And we know experientially at the Linux Foundation how vibrant our events are and how much value they bring to open source software developers. They are important intersections for collaboration, for networking, for bridge building, for problem solving, for staying up to date on best practices, for being at the cutting edge of what's announced, what's new, what tool has just been launched that will add value, that's free, that's open source, and everyone should be using it. Everybody should be collaborating around it. And problems can be solved through this mutualization. So our experience really, truly contradicted what this existing research was saying. And so Intel came to us and said, we have a hypothesis. Can you help us test it? What do open source software developers really need? And what do you know? Events ranked particularly high in the findings. In-person events. And that's not to say that online events did not, but things like workshops and interactive opportunities were vitally important. SIGs, meetups, hackathons, those things that bring communities together from, competitors within an industry or given field were really, really important. And we actually explored which events in particular were valuable.
When we look at the software developers, one is the cultural aspect. They don't like the socialization, and the other aspect is that they also want to have an environment where they can easily work, tools available. So was the focus of this report mostly on the cultural side of software developers' life, or it was also more or less like about tools and open source code aspect as well?
It ranked a whole list of things, from training to tools to resources to events, and then got a little bit deeper into some of the highest level resources that developers really found valuable. And I'll tell you, and I thank you for what you say about Linux Foundation events, and our intention is to be as inclusive as possible, because as we convene people, we're not all coming together to have a hug, or interact in a way that makes anybody feel uncomfortable, whether it's a handshake or whatever, respecting everyone's individual preferences. But what we do know is one thing developers have in common is a love of learning, and the ability to learn through live presentation, or to be really present and experience something that's new, to be the first to hear something. So oftentimes new things are announced at events. And that's what brings people out, is they want to be part of what is current, what's important, to really, really learn. They don't have to socialize, but they have to get value from the experience. And I think the opportunities to learn and the opportunities to listen. There's also something else that it's an expression, and it was used by the late Queen Elizabeth, who said, "You must be seen to be believed." It really demonstrates that showing up and being present and being together with your community is very, very important. You cannot sit in your ivory tower and expect to have an impact. Ultimately, we as human beings are more collaborative and effective when we come together and share as a community. And those are the principles behind what makes open source great. A lot of the work just happens to happen virtually, but great things happen when we come together as a community. And we learned about what the events in open source are that are most widely attended. And this might not surprise you, but KubeCon comes out on top. I mean, given the numbers that show up to KubeCon, Cloud Native Con, 10,000 and up routinely, the most widely attended event. And that's followed by Open Source Summit, PyCon, and then FOSDEM. Huge developer event in Brussels, free, very, it's unstructured. It's very rewarding, though, to be present and to network with your peers. So anyway, all told, it was an enlightening research study. It was validating that the hypothesis was tested, and we learned really how much inspiration and motivation are critical factors to open source software developer success. How important it is to work together, to learn to learn new skills, and convene as a community. So this idea of working alone in your basement might be good for some, but on balance, people need to come together. And that was what was really exciting, especially coming out of COVID.
Based on this report, what lessons have you learned which might reflect in future events or things, whether it's training or courses you will plan for software developers?
One of the important outcomes of the report, I think, ties in very strongly to our need to secure open source software. Very specifically, we had a social engineering attack through XEUtils. And while it was mitigated, it really awakened the community about the need to know your contributors. And how do we know each other? I mean, the kernel community will not accept commits from folks that they just don't know. That's the power of coming together and having a reputation score enhanced by showing up. This is who I am. This is my work. This is what I personally stand behind. And I am a trusted person in this community. And you know me, you can trust me. So I think the report validates the significance of open source events to create trust, to create communities, and ultimately to build more secure software because we know each other. We know each other. And even if folks want to contribute code privately, it's important to have a reputation. We need some mechanism to know the difference between somebody who's inserted a backdoor after establishing trust for 2 years, that's playing the long game, versus people we know and trust and have had decades of writing good code. We know who they are. We know what they stand for. We know all about them. And I think it really plays into our ongoing need to build secure software and to implement best practices, and know your coder is a big part of that.
Excellent, thank you. Now let's talk about the generative AI, report. First of all, this is the hottest topic. So, what aspect of generative AI did you folks focus on when you're working on this report? Just give us the once again intro and overview of this report.
Sure. So this is our second GenAI specific research study at the Linux Foundation. We published our first effort approximately a year ago, where we were really just trying to explore the state of generative AI. What does it all mean? Where does open source factor into this, the emergence of this, powerful new technology that everybody's talking about? This year, we wanted to go a little bit deeper, and we had a partnership with LF.AI and Data and the Cloud Native Computing Foundation to really understand what was the role of cloud infrastructure in generative AI development and deployment, and what was the role of openness and trust in building generative AI models that have a high likelihood of adoption that will influence policy and decision making, and it help inform responsible regulation so that innovation can continue. And I think those were the real driving forces behind doing a more in-depth study in the space. Also proving that generative AI is not just a fad, that it's so much more than hype, that it has significant value for industry. And it's really, really important to get it right. It's really important to build trust. And it plays into all the other things that are going on in our society around fake news and the need for content authenticity and the need to have trusted systems. And so getting AI right, we believe is best achieved through openness, through open source collaboration, through infusing human values into our systems and allowing for inspection. And so this study really validated that, again, what we believe to be important as an organization value-wise is also the market responds in similar fashion. And so a lot of our findings, first of all, validate the significance of the technology. It's not a fad. We had 79% of our respondents saying that generative AI is massive when it comes to productivity. It is ultimately an incredible productivity tool, whether it relates to content generation, code generation, and so on. Its applications are incredible in productivity terms. How we're deploying generative AI speaks to the importance of communities like the Cloud Native Computing Foundation and cloud infrastructure. We learned a lot about how generative AI models are hosted. 50% of them are on Kubernetes for their inference workloads. And we have most organizations adopting multiple strategies for hosting GenAI. 49% are hosting in the cloud. And so engagement in our project communities like CNCF is helping keep organizations in the know, up to speed, engaged in working groups that exist within CNCF and also within our other project communities too. The FinTech Open Source Foundation, for example, our financial services vertical community, they've got AI working groups. This is a technology that really will benefit from open source collaboration within industries and across domains, and that kind of collaboration is really, really important. So our survey says.
When we look at GenAI, of course, it brings great value, but there are some concerns also. People also say that, yes, human will always be involved. You cannot fully trust it. There are some concerns around privacy. There are some concerns around leaking your sensitive data. There are also concerns around, they plugging into your data, which can leak once again your trade secrets or sensitive data or copyright. Publishers are worried, actors are worried. In California, laws are being passed. In Europe, a lot of work is going on. So when you're working on this report, how much of these current concerns were also part of this? And will Linux Foundation take any initiative in mitigating some of these concerns so folks can freely, because you folks also democratize and make a lot of technology accessible. So once again, what lessons can we learn from it and how it will reflect on Linux Foundation's efforts?
Yeah, I think it's incredibly important to respect copyright in building generative AI models, using them, and making sure that the rightful owner of a piece of copyright has their rights respected. It's sort of a fundamental value of society, and so it's important to have the models be open, but there are limitations as to what we can and cannot inspect within the boundaries of how our society actually works, how businesses work. That data is a differentiating asset. Copyright is a thing that's owned. And so there are naturally going to be limitations about what models should and can access. And that's the difference between open science and pure open AI. You're just not going to be able to have access to everybody's proprietary data. LFAI and Data Foundation has published guidance on those kinds of parameters, the differences between open science and open source AI models, and understanding that we do not live in a world where everything is wide open. That data, remember that expression, data is the new oil? It's how companies make money. They make money on data, and that's not going to change anytime soon. But we can build AI models that are going to do a lot of powerful things that can be trained on highly specific data. How we access data is a point for collaboration. What data can be shared? We encourage the sharing of data at the Linux Foundation. We have, our principle around community data license agreement, data sharing license agreement under which Linux Foundation Research shares survey data, because we're trying to create open data sets for the whole world to use because it's valuable. And that's our contribution to how models can be trained. Similarly, our research is indeed published under Creative Commons license. And I hope that every AI system out there is going to train on Linux Foundation research. We're pouring a ton of data sets out there. And I'm sure that every time I use ChatGPT and import LF research projects for one purpose or another, we're tweaking those models for the better. So it's incumbent upon us to encourage data sharing within reason and respecting where the appropriate points for sharing begin and end. Copyright is copyright, and nobody wants their work stolen.
When it comes to AI, can you also talk about what projects, what foundation? Because the interesting thing with Linux Foundation is that there are so many projects. Sometimes they overlap projects. The whole idea is projects can come in, and then later on, we see what projects works where. So can you also talk about the Linux Foundation foundations which are there focusing on AI, and how your team works with them to generate these reports?
That's a great question. Well, I think our flagship projects really are PyTorch Foundation, a framework for building large language models, LFAI and Data Foundation, which hosts dozens of projects incubating, graduating, tools in AI. There's the Delta Lake project to manage data specific to AI applications. The truth is, Swap, that you'd be hard pressed to find a project community at the Linux Foundation where AI is not a priority, where there isn't a special interest group or some kind of AI working group, that it is touching all of our communities. It's as significant as cybersecurity. Yeah. So in terms of how our project communities are approaching AI and what that looks like for our research agenda, we have been in discussions with a specific organization, no names mentioned at this point, who have scoped out a study on sovereign AI, exploring the propensity for organizations and governments alike to create smaller scale, sovereign, highly tailored AI systems to meet company need, country need, regional need, and what that looks like, and how can we collaborate on smaller or sovereign AI systems, and what is the state of awareness of open source in building out a trusted sovereign AI. So that is on the agenda, a very preliminary study right now. And what I can say also is that there's usually an AI question in every single one of our research reports. It's increasingly featured in the top 3 priority technology areas for open source collaboration and industry strategy.
Hilary, thank you so much for taking time out today, join us, and talk about these 2 reports. Once again, as usual, great insight there, and I look forward to chatting with you again. Thank you.
Thank you, Swap. I really appreciate the opportunity.